All right, since you're here early, you get to be on live for the Book of the Week pre-show show. So the Book of the Week this week is Created for Connection, the Hold Me Tight Guide for Christian Couples. Now, the reason I'm sharing this one is the book itself, the content may or may not be of interest to you. It's not so much about the content of this book, it's about the technique that the author used to come up with the idea for this book. So this is a book written off of another book. So Sue Johnson, the big name there at the bottom, so she didn't write this book. It's actually Kenneth Sandifer who wrote the book. But Sue Johnson wrote another book called Love Sense, and she created, I think she has another one called Hold Me Tight. But anyway, she's a therapist. She's a relationship therapist. And she has this scientific, really well researched method that she uses for therapy for couples. So Kenneth Sandifer, I think he's a pastor or something like that, but he came along and he said, I love this material. I want to write a book that uses Dr. Sue Johnson's material, but for my audience, for this Christian audience. And so I assume what happened is he went to her and said, hey, I want to write this book, but I want to put a religious angle on it. And I'll help market the book. I'll do the writing. I'll do everything. And I just need you to approve it and put your name on it. So Sue Johnson, I'm guessing, probably didn't do any of the writing in this book. Maybe she assisted. Maybe she gave some advice. I could be wrong. Maybe she wrote part of it, but I don't think she did. And the benefit to Sue Johnson, of course, is there's another book out there with her name on it, and she probably gets some of the money from it. She certainly gets the credibility from it. Kenneth Sandifer may have been a no-name author, and now he gets to associate his name with Sue Johnson, who's somebody who already has a following, is already famous. And of course, Kenneth Sandifer gets to use her material, which is very credible and very well researched. It's been developed over the last 30 years or something. He gets to use that material, which is helpful for his audience, and his audience gets access to that great research. So this is a collaboration where everybody wins. The reader wins, the authors win, nobody loses, everybody wins on this type of collaboration. So some first-time authors will say, I don't have an idea for a book, or I don't know what I want to write, or I'm not an expert, I don't have enough expertise. I talked to a kid the other day, he's 19 years old. I said, you really need to write a book. He's a writer for some publications. And I said, when are you going to come out with a book? And he's like, I'm too young, I don't have the experience. I'm thinking, first of all, he's got the experience. He could go write his own book right now. But even if he really felt like, oh, I don't have the experience to do it, he could go find somebody like Kenneth found Dr. Sue Johnson and say, hey, let me partner with you. I will do all the work. I'll write the book, but let's leverage your name to get this out there and get more eyeballs on it. So that's a way to write a book and have kind of an easier time of it because you can leverage somebody else's content. Another example of this, and I've shared this book before, The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. So Hal Elrod wrote this book, which has become this amazing bestseller. And I think I may have showed this before on a previous Q&A, but if you go back to the back of the book, then you see all this stuff in here. You've got Miracle Morning for salespeople, Miracle Morning for real estate agents, Miracle Morning for network marketers, for writers, for entrepreneurs, for parents and family, for college students. You've got all these other books leveraging this first book. So if you're writing a book, you can often leverage it into other avenues. But the thing is, all those books in the back, I'm pretty sure Hal Elrod did not write those books. Either he went to people and said, hey, do you want to co-author a book with me? You write the book for this audience, you use my material, and you get to have your name as a co-author on there with me. Or those people may have come to Hal Elrod and said, hey, can I do a book, The Miracle Morning for Entrepreneurs? And so everybody wins. So think about that. If you're struggling with your book idea and what to do, maybe you can go co-author a book with somebody else, and then everybody wins. All right, Elenia's already got a question in the Q&A there. If you've got questions, pop them there in the Q&A. Before we get to the Q&A, I've got some exciting news, which you may have already seen, although I haven't sent an email out about it yet because I've been so busy and have not had a chance to write the email. But the Published Author Podcast has finally launched. It's actually live with the first 5 episodes up. I just popped the Apple Podcast, iTunes link there in the chat. This podcast is going to be a valuable resource for all of you. I've already recorded 34 episodes, so I know exactly what's out there and I know how valuable it is. And this is such good stuff because I'm talking to the people that I want to learn from, the people that I go to and I say, okay, if I were an entrepreneur wanting to learn how to write a book, publish a book, get a book written, ghostwrite it, whatever, who would I go to? What questions do I have? And I'm calling those people up and getting them on the podcast and asking them all sorts of questions. And so I'm talking to a lot of authors about their process and how they wrote their books, but I'm also talking to ghostwriters and editors and publishers and literary agents and all sorts of other people about the publishing process. And there's some super interesting stuff in there. And I'm amazed as I get to interview these people. I'm like, this is so great. But I'm also so excited to be able to share this with you. So go check out the podcast. It's on Spotify, it's Stitcher, it's everywhere that you can find podcasts. But I do have a big favor to ask of you, which is that if you get more reviews on your podcast when you launch a podcast on iTunes, then it gets more attention because Apple says, hey, people are interested in this podcast. Let's show this to people more in searches and get it in front of them so that more people will see it because maybe this is great content a lot of people want to access. So I need to get as many reviews as quickly as I can on Apple Podcasts. And so it would be a huge favor to me. I would really appreciate it if you could click on that link, go to Apple Podcast, check out an episode or two, and then leave a review on Apple Podcasts. You don't have to have an iPhone. You don't have to be on a Mac or anything like that. So you can go there and it's pretty quick and you can leave a review there. I'd love it if you left a 5-star review, but any honest review is more than welcome. So I would super appreciate that, but especially go listen to the content because there's some really great stuff in there. The first episode is just me talking because I'm introducing the podcast. That stuff might not be so great, but all the other stuff is awesome. All right. So with that, let's get into the Q&A today. So Elenia, hey, Josh, I have about 15 interviews for my book. That's great. That's fantastic. Some of them are companies and some others are other authors and consultants. I was thinking to include a list of them with a short bio on one of the first pages of my book to prepare the reader on who these people are. What do you think? If this is a good idea, should it go at the beginning or at the end? So I would recommend doing the bio at the beginning. This is what I did in my first book, Chief Marketing Officers at Work. And the reason I did that is people listen or read more intently and they remember better if they think they're listening to somebody who's important and credible and has authority. And so if you don't give them the bio until the end of the paragraph or the end of the chapter, the section, then people are constantly thinking that whole time, why should I be listening to this person? But if you put the bio at the beginning and you establish the authority and the credibility and the experience, then they check off that why box and then they can just focus on the content itself. So definitely I would recommend putting the bio and the credibility triggers and that stuff at the beginning of each chapter or at the beginning of each interview. Shlomo, hey Josh, so the Growth Hacking Book 2, which I contributed to, came out 2 days ago. Lots of hype around it. How can I leverage that best for my next quote unquote real book? So man, there are so many things that you could do with this, Shlomo. So boy, see, you can leverage that book to get PR attention. So that's one thing that you can do is build up your PR profile by pitching people and reaching out to journalists and stuff and saying, hey, I was in this book that just came out and I'm happy to talk on this topic. That's not the best pitch that you can do, PR pitch. But that type of general idea of reaching out to people in the news or journalists, media people, and trying to get some coverage for that. Also, publicizing, of course, you want it on your LinkedIn profile, and you probably already have this on your LinkedIn profile, on your personal brand website. if there's some sort of lead magnet that you can create from your section of the book and then put that on your website and maybe give away your chapter or something, or just give some, make a checklist off of something that you said or something that's in the book, and then use that checklist as a lead magnet and then also link to the book so that people are wanting to buy the book. Uh, I think a lot of what you'll be able to use it for is if you're doing research for your quote unquote real book, it's very useful to have that book as your credibility when you contact somebody and say, "Hey, I'd like to interview you for the new book that I'm writing." And you can mention, "Hey, I just finished contributing to this growth hacking book number 2, and I was in there, and now I'm writing my own book." That instantly gives you a little bit more credibility. So Elenia was just talking about how she got her 15 interviews. It's hard to get really credible people to be interviewed, and it's easy to get non-credible people. And of course, you want credible people to interview you for your, or to interview for your book. And if you can go to them and talk about a book that you were already in, then that's a plus. It establishes you as somebody who's more credible than just some random guy off the street. So for example, when people ask me to be on podcasts, I don't really do much due diligence myself, but a lot of other people do. And because I don't do my due diligence, then I have ended up on some podcasts that are kind of lower quality podcasts, which is fine because I like helping out people who are just getting started. Well, one time I ended up on a podcast where it was an 18-year-old kid in Romania whose computer had broken. And so he needed me to also record the podcast for him for his podcast. And so that was kind of the extreme version where I was like, okay, great, let's do this. And I'm guessing that he had probably zero audience. He might have had 10 listeners or something on his podcast, but I'm like, hey, great, whatever. I'm happy to talk with this guy. So I talked with him, but there are a lot of people who would say, well, how many downloads are you getting? Or let me check out your podcast first and just make sure that it's reputable. And the same with reaching out to interview people. If you reach out to interview people, they might say, well, wait, who are you and what have you done before? But if you can throw out there, hey, I was just in this book, immediately that checks some of that box of people worrying about who you are and what you're all about. So that's one way that you can leverage that book. I think we could come up with lots of other ideas too, but hopefully some of those are helpful. Elenia, I had a chat with Aaron Rickson about his copy editing services, but he said to be very selective on the book he chooses to work on, or he said he's very selective on the book he chooses to work on, meaning it's a no for my book. And as he's not a full-time editor, he said to be taking 8 to 12 weeks to edit a book of approximately 50K words. I got a bit demotivated about the lead time as my aim is to publish by May/June, but I have just started writing. How long do editors usually take to edit a book? And could you recommend someone or somewhere to find a good editor, please? So what I'll do, Elenia, is I have some more editors to add to that resource doc that I posted in the group before. So if you haven't seen that resource doc, I'm pretty sure you've seen it, Elenia, but for those who may have not heard about this, so I created a Google Doc. It's linked in the Facebook group. And in that doc, I'm just listing links to everybody and every service and everything that I've ever used or that I recommend using. And there's websites and people and all sorts of stuff in there. And it needs more editors, but I have some more editors that I just haven't put in there yet. And I'll get those added to that document. And then I'll send out a note to everybody letting them know that it's been updated. But yeah, it's, uh, don't get demotivated though. I mean, Aaron does have to be, everybody has to be choosy. So, I mean, it's kind of a nice place to be in for Aaron, but he's really good at what he does. And so he is in demand. And so he has to make decisions about who to work with and who not to work with. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you or with your book or anything like that. It just means that it just might not be the best fit. He might be saying, hey, I'm not the best fit to edit this book. You could go find somebody who'd be a better fit and do a better job on it, is what he might be saying. So if anybody ever turns you down, whether it's an editor or an agent or a publisher or anything like that, don't take it personally. You just move on and you go find somebody better who's a better fit for you. So we've all heard these stories about book writers who pitched 50 publishers, and then it was the 50th one who finally said yes, or a startup entrepreneur who pitched 50 VCs, and it was the 50th one who finally funded them or something. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of trial and error to find the right fit. And it's not that you have a bad idea, it's that every VC fund works with different types of startups. Every editor works with different types of books. And so every time they're looking at it and they're saying, is this the best fit for me? Does this fit my genius zone? And sometimes yes, sometimes no, but it doesn't mean anything about you or your book. It just means it's not a fit for them. So anyway, I'll update that list. I'll get that to you. Gene, I'm launching a course on March 16th, 2021 that will have a corresponding workbook. All students will get a digital version of the workbook, but I want to make the physical softcover version available for purchase on Amazon. With 60 days before launch, does this give me enough time in my launch calendar? What are the major milestones and how long will it take to get physical books available for purchase on Amazon? By the way, the workbook hasn't been completed yet, so I'm using this launch schedule to push me forward. So definitely doable within 60 days, Gene, no problem. How long will it take? You can literally get a physical book available for purchase on Amazon within days. So it can be done that quick once you have the final manuscript. So you can do it within days. Chances are it's probably going to take more than a few days. It might take you a week or two, but we're not talking about months or anything like that. And so you're no matter what, you're probably going to be short for time because things will come up and things will interrupt and get in your way. But it's something that you can do pretty quick. So I wouldn't worry too much about the timing since you have the 60 days. As long as you've got the content done, then don't worry too much about how much time it takes to get up on Amazon because it's fast. All right. Who's going to go next? I would love to hear from anybody and everybody who's got questions out there. If people don't start saying questions, I'm going to start calling on people and asking for updates and where you're at. Like Scott Porter, where are you at with the taco book, Scott? I want to hear an update from you. All right, Gene's got, did you post a checklist for publishing on Amazon yet? Nope, don't have the checklist up yet. Still working on it, hoping to have that done by next week, but it's not up yet. By the way, I'm not the only person who has a checklist out there. So I know there are probably 20 other websites that do have an Amazon publishing type checklist type thing out there. So it's pretty easy to Google this stuff and find stuff out there. I'm trying to make my checklist unique by fitting it into more of the 7 systems type of format, but there are other resources out there. Sue, please take a look at my comment in the chat. Sue says, I now have 24 stories and collecting more so easily. That's great. Have my design person doing the cover of my book, also great. We'll share that when he sends it back. Would love to see it. Please post that in the Facebook group so we can take a look at it. It would be great to have it there. And I'd love to do some analysis on the cover as well, if you're open to that, Sue, during one of these Q&As, and we can talk about cover design a little bit. In fact, I was just talking with another client that I'm coaching about his book cover, and I might pull his up and we can talk about his a little bit today. Please consider signing up with Gene for his weekly meeting. I met with him this week and got some fabulous information from Gene for my marketing, which is the one area that I'm weak in. So I will be doing my best to continue with his meeting. Remember, you never know who you are talking to and what you can give and receive. Yes. So this group, this masterclass, one of the best things that's come out of this is Gene doing these meetings, because it's not just about me talking to you all the time and answering all your questions. A lot of you have information that you can use to help each other. And I love that Gene is putting together these meetings on his own, and highly encourage you to join those meetings and check out what's going on in Gene's own meetings. Because the point here is not to have everybody just listen to me all the time. It's to get your book across the finish line. And if somebody can offer putting these meetings together like Gene has done, that's great because it's helping people. Elenia, I'm looking at pages on Amazon Books. I assume these pages are A5. How can I convert a book of approximately 50,000 words into A5 pages numbers, please. I've tried some online tools, but they don't specify what page size, and my feeling is that they convert into A4 pages. So, um, so the pages, Elenia, so there's some tools for this. One of these, so what we're getting into is typesetting here, which is how your pages are laid out. How many words per page? How big is the font? What about the vertical spacing? How big of a margin do you have? Where do the page numbers go? There's all this stuff to think about. And one of the tools that's out there that you might find really useful is that Readsy has a free online writing tool. I think this is the one. I'm bringing it up right here. Yeah. And they were about to release a new version the last time I looked at this. I'm going to pop this link in the chat. So Readsy is kind of like the number one spot for writers online, but they have this, so you can put your document, your manuscript into Readsy's writing tool, and then you can export it, and they'll help you typeset it within this software, and you can export it, and it's going to be perfect for publishing on Amazon. So if I were in your shoes, Elenia, I would check this out, try importing your document to Readsy's tool, and mess around with the settings in there and try to get it just right in Readsy. And then you should be able to export a document that is absolutely perfect for Amazon. And you can export it for different sizes. So you can say, okay, I want to go with A5 or A4 or whatever, 9x6, whatever size you want. And you can take care of all that stuff within Readsy's tool. So check that out, Elenia. And I would love to hear your feedback on this tool, Elenia, or anybody else who tries it out. Let me know what you think of Readsy's tool. One second while I get a drink here. All right, Kevin, back to domain name issues. The person who owns kevinmar.com is not responding. I've tried 3 times. What is my next best move? That stinks, doesn't it? Yep. So if you're trying to get a domain name like Kevin is, and the person is not responding, don't do the GoDaddy thing that's $70 or $90 where they say, hey, we might be able to get this domain for you, pay us $70 and we'll reach out and see. All they're going to do is they're going to reach out and try to contact this person the same way that you're trying to contact the person. And then they'll come back and say, oh, sorry, it didn't work, but thank you for the $70. So don't waste your money on that service. Reach out directly. And if you can't get a hold of them through the information on your domain name, look and see if there are other ways to get a hold of them, because maybe you can find that person on LinkedIn or something. And now, one question is when to see when this domain expires. So often when a domain expires, there are these companies, the cyber squatters, that snap up domains immediately when they expire. But a domain that's a name like Kevin Marr, they might not be so quick on. So I'm just looking this up real quick to see if we can see when it expires here real quick. So I'm looking it up on the Whois service. Let's see. Expires October of 2021. And of course, you don't want to wait that long. And it looks like they have private registration on it. So it's not easy to figure out who owns it, unfortunately. All right. So I would keep trying to get that domain name, Kevin. I'd keep reaching out every once in a while. I'd keep looking around. I would do, because your name is not, I mean, it's not as rare as Josh Steimle, but it's not as common as John Brown or something either. So it might be worth looking around on LinkedIn. Like I'm just going to pull up LinkedIn here real quick and do a quick search. I'm just curious how many Kevin Mars are out there. because if there are only 10 other Kevin Mars on LinkedIn or something, why not send a message to all 10 and just say, hey, I'm trying to track down the owner of kevinmar.com and found you on LinkedIn. And let's see, looks like there might be more than 10 Kevin Mars out there. That's more common than I was thinking. So you could probably eliminate a bunch of these people, though. Well, maybe, maybe not. But I don't know. It might not hurt to kind of narrow down these search results and then reach out to a few of these Kevin Mars and just say, hey, by any chance, do you own kevinmar.com? It's somebody owns it, but they're not using it. I'm trying to see if I can buy it from them. It wouldn't take that long to search, and it would be so good to get that domain. Now, your alternatives are to plug an initial in there or to reverse it. So it's like Mar Kevin instead of Kevin Mar, but none of these, an initial isn't so bad, but any of these other solutions, it's just not as good as just being able to have your name and have the straightforward name. So I'd keep trying to get that. But yeah, if you can't get it, now you could also create a domain name that's centered around your interest. So if your book is about fencing, so if it's going to be about that, you could use a domain name temporarily that is based around your interest instead and make that your personal domain name. So it could be, Kevin Fencing is not what I'd recommend, but just something like that, kevinfencing.com or something, or kevinpointyendgoesforward.com. That'd be too long. But that type of thing where you integrate your name into your interest or you just make it all about your interest, that's the type of thing that you can do. And then you can keep trying to get that domain name that is your name. But ultimately, you really do want to get that name. All right, Gene, I'm really improvising now with my recording studio space that is now in the same room as my office, bed where I sleep, and my son's baby crib. That's complicated. Question: what's your opinion about online courses that are audio over PowerPoints versus picture-in-picture video over PowerPoints? I'm asking because I'm struggling to find a good background and I no longer have enough space for a green screen. All right. So I my my preference is to do a face over the PowerPoint. And just to be clear, for anybody who's wondering what we're talking about, so Gene's going to launch this online course and he's going to be using slides and showing slides. And the question is, should he also show his face like small in the lower corner so that people can see that there's a human being talking to them? Or should he just show the slides and just have audio over the slides? I think it's great to show your face down there, not because people are going to be watching you exactly while you're speaking, but there's just something a little bit more connected and human about it than if you just have the slides up and you're just talking through the slides. Now, when I do webinars, I often will do just the slides. And the reason I do that is because Zoom isn't, at least at the moment, doesn't make it convenient to show your face and show the slides at the same time, or at least I don't know if there's a convenient way to do that. I haven't seen it. So, but when I've recorded webinars, the software that I use, I can put my face up and I can put the slides up and modify and play around with the different sizes of them relative to each other. So that's what I prefer to do if I'm recording an online course. So that's what I would do. I'd recommend showing your face and let us see you because it will make it more personal. Okay, ready for more questions? And let's head on over to Amazon and do a little book cover analysis, title analysis type stuff just for fun. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, here we go. Anybody have a book they want me to check out and do some analysis on? Just shout out in the chat there, favorite book or book that you'd like me to take a look at if you want. Otherwise, I'm going to pull one up. Actually, you know what? No. Well, let's take a look at something. This is not a book cover. This is a movie cover, but this might be instructive. Depends what they show us here as we look at this. Okay. So let's. So who has seen the movie Edge of Tomorrow starring Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt? It's an exciting movie. It's better than you would think. It's basically Groundhog Day with an alien invasion. So if you like Groundhog Day and you like alien invasion movies, this is the movie for you. So, all right. So Edge of Tomorrow came out in 2014. And here's what I'm looking for. Okay. So look at these movie posters over here on the right side. So when they originally released Edge of Tomorrow, it was more like this right here. So you see they've got Edge of Tomorrow is big, and then Live, Die, Repeat is small. But then they found out that when they focused on the words Live, Die, Repeat, they were selling more tickets. And so they started to make Live, Die, Repeat bigger and Edge of Tomorrow smaller. So you see here in this image that suddenly Live, Die, Repeat is front and center on the page, and Edge of Tomorrow has now been put down at the bottom. And then it started getting even bigger. So Live, Die, Repeat is even bigger text here, and Edge of Tomorrow has been moved even a little bit further down. And then finally, in the end, they ended up with, because they found that Live, Die, Repeat was just really selling a lot more tickets, they ended up with the movie cover looking like this over here on the right. Live, Die, Repeat, Edge of Tomorrow. It's nowhere to be seen except in the URL there at the very bottom. And so as you think about cover design, there's cover design that looks good, and there's cover design that sells books, that moves books, that gets your books in the hands of the people you want to be reading your book. And it's great to have both. It's great to have good design and a functional design. But if I had to choose one or the other, and I'm saying this even as a designer, if I had to choose one or the other, I'd rather have a functional design that sells and moves books than one that looks good. Ideally, we want to have both. So that's just a little thing that I wanted to share about that can apply to cover design. Now, if somebody wants to talk about another book cover, then we can do that. Let's see what people put in the chat here. So, everybody's just commenting on how they love Edge of Tomorrow. Yeah, it is a fun movie, I think. Okay. Oh, and Barry says there's a tool plugin called that works with Zoom and other platforms that shows your face. I've played with it a little bit. All right, great. I am going to go check that out because I would love to be able to do that. Okay, so let's get back to the next question here. Elenia, what's the average time for copy editing a book of approximately 50,000 words, do you think? There's no average time here, Elenia. It's going to depend on every editor. So what I would do is I would talk to multiple editors and ask them, I've got a book, it's a business book, nonfiction. Oh, really, you shouldn't be reaching out to editors until you've verified that they edit nonfiction, that that's their thing. So really, it would just be, I've got my book, it's 50,000 words. What's your bandwidth like? How long would it take you to edit a 50,000 word book? And you're going to get different answers from all sorts of people. Some people will say, I'm busy, can't start for 2 months. Other people will say, I'm busy, but I can start on it now. I just can't work on it full time. So it might take me a month or two to finish working on it. And other people might say, oh, you know what? I just have an opening right now. I'm not busy with anything and I can edit it in 1 week or something. So there's no average time per se. I can't even make a guess. It's something that you will have to talk to an editor about, and it's going to be different from one editor to the other. So one editor might come in and say, oh, you know what? I can edit this in 20 hours. Another one might say it's going to take me 60 hours. So you're going to get a range there. And it doesn't mean one's wrong and one's right. Doesn't mean one's better and one's worse. Different editors work in different ways. Some are more thorough, some skim a little bit more. I'm reading a book by a friend right now, and he worked for a long time, like months, with a developmental editor, and they were reading his book over and over and over again. And I'm still finding typos and places where they used, uh, instead of exasperate, they used exacerbate. I mean, they're using the wrong words in places, so the sentence doesn't even mean what they want it to mean. And so no matter who you work with, they're probably going to have some errors slip through, but some people will be better than others and some people will be faster. And so there's quality issues, there's time issues, there's bandwidth, there's their schedule, there's all this stuff. And so the only way to figure out what's going to work for you is to go out and talk to a bunch of authors and shop around and see who can do the best job for you right now within the time frame that you are looking for. Also, Elenia, my book will feature examples of good customer experiences, but I would also like to mention not so good examples of brand with a bad CX. What do you think are the implications for doing so? So, chance whenever you're going to speak negatively about someone, it is good to take into account how they might react to it. Now, if you're going to talk about President Trump and be negative in your book, who cares? Because there are a million other books out there talking negative about him. He doesn't have time to pay attention to every single book. So if it's somebody really famous like Elon Musk or Oprah or somebody, and you want to say something negative, don't worry about it, as long as you are being 100% factual, and or you're stating your opinion on something and it's obvious that it's your opinion. So an example of what you wouldn't want to do is to say Elon Musk broke into a federal facility and stole classified documents. Well, that's something that you could get sued for, right? Because it's not factual. You don't have that information unless you do. And so that's the type of thing that you don't just say, because you're going to get into a minefield and you don't want to get into a gray area where somebody could think that you're saying something like that. Now, if you say Elon Musk is a jerk and he's not nice to his employees, well, that's subjective. That's your opinion. And so you're safe saying that, because it's your opinion. It's pretty obvious that it's your opinion. Now, hopefully you would back that claim up with some evidence and interview some people or something. And so now, if you're going to give examples of bad customer experience and say, like, hey, Starbucks, the way that they lay out their restaurants, they have bad customer experience because they do X, Y, and Z, they're not going to come after you for that. They're not going to say, hey, you're disparaging us, or this is a libel case and we're going to sue you. They're not going to do that. If anything, they might read it and like it and say, hey, we need to hire this person to help us out with this problem. So there are lots of gray lines about what you can say and what you can't say. But whenever, it's good to ask the question, but also to be realistic about what is somebody probably going to do when they read this. If you say something negative about an individual, they're more likely to come after you than a corporation. If you say something about somebody who's not famous, they're more likely to come after you than somebody who is famous and deals with this all the time and is used to it. So, no matter what you do, if you're analyzing somebody's CX, it is important to be not emotional and to not be insulting, right? To be factual again, going back to that. So if you're saying something negative about somebody's website or about the way their business is set up, then you can say, research shows that this works better in this situation, and so did not do this, and it provides for a negative experience. Well, that's factual, and then you can back that up and say, hey, I'm just talking about research and analyzing what they've done. Whereas if you said, the people at Starbucks are idiots for the way that they've laid things out and they're running their business terribly, well, you're putting in a lot of personal feelings and emotions into that statement rather than just sticking to the facts, and you get into a little bit more dangerous area there. Gene, do you approve of me publishing my workbook without an editor? Yeah, because I always say you need to get an editor, right? It's a little bit different for a workbook. If you're publishing a book that's like these books back on the shelves, or most of these books, there are a few workbooks back there too. But if you're publishing a book that is your manifesto, it's your baby, it's your thing that represents who you are, you should always get an editor. You should always have somebody who knows what they're doing, looking over that manuscript and making sure that it's good. If it's a workbook, that's more the type of thing that people are going to let things slide. It's not as critical, it's not as important. Of course, it would be good to have an editor on that as well. But yeah, I think you could get away without having an editor. I would still have somebody look at it, whether it's your spouse or a friend or somebody, preferably 10 people, have them take a look at it before you publish it and go through it and find things. And this is pretty easy to crowdsource. You go on LinkedIn and you say, hey, I've got this workbook. I've got 10 sections. I'd love to have people review each of the 10 sections and just proofread it, give me any feedback for improvement. That's easy to do these days. And you can get some great feedback, and you might also attract some audience members. Elenia, what are the criteria for choosing a good editor, please? All right, great question. The first criteria for choosing a good editor is somebody that you feel comfortable working with. If you don't feel comfortable with somebody for any reason whatsoever, it's not going to be a good fit for you. So that's number one. Talk to them, get on a Zoom call, meet them in person, do a phone call. I think a Zoom call is much better than a phone call because you get a lot of body language and you learn things that you wouldn't learn on a phone call. But talk to somebody if you're getting serious about hiring them. So number one, feel comfortable with them. Number two, ask for references and talk to the references. This is the main mistake most people make is they say, oh, I really like this person. I feel comfortable with them. And then they get trapped into working with somebody who's incompetent and can't actually do a good job, doesn't deliver on time. So get the references, check the references. You eliminate a lot of people just by asking for references because then they never get back to you because they don't have any good references that they can send to you. So that's good. You eliminate some people. You don't have to do any more research. You can focus your time on the people who do have references. But then contact those references and ask them, like, would you hire this person again? Did you like working with them? Did you have any tough spots that you went through with them? And how did you work that out? Try to get them to reveal any difficulty that they might have had working with that editor, and you'll eliminate a bunch of other people that way as well. If you just do those two things, find people you're comfortable with, ask for references, and then check the references, right there, you're going to eliminate 95% of the editors you should not be working with right there. So you've already got it narrowed down to a pretty good group at that point. And then you can always do a little test project with them. So, because there's no substitute for actually working with them and seeing what they do. Even if they give you positive references, maybe there were circumstances that made it positive and it's not going to apply to your situation. So say, hey, I'd like to do a little test project. Can I pay you just to analyze the first chapter and go through that and tell me what you think? That's going to reveal a lot in terms of how responsive they are, how quickly they get back to you, how they communicate. You might find out that they are a great editor, but they're really straightforward and kind of mean in their feedback or something. You might be like, you know what? I can't take this for the whole book. I need to work with somebody that is a little bit more friendly and a little bit, couches this a little bit more diplomatically. So once you do a little test project with them, then you'll have a much better idea of what they're going to be like as you work with them. So try those three things out, and I think you'll narrow it down pretty quickly to somebody that you like working with. Kevin, what is the name of the picture in the slide deck link in Zoom? Oh, is that the thing that we were talking about? Or, oh, the link for it. Yeah. I don't know. For Barry, do you know what the link is? I'm guessing you can just do a search for too. Gene, what is the cost benefit time-wise and cost-wise of offering a print version of my workbook, given that new content slash information may be added in future iterations of the course and people can just print your workbook at Kinko's if they want to have a physical copy? Uh, Depends on your audience. I'm not sure. It's a question I've been asking myself. So now it's not that hard to update your workbook. So if you update the workbook, you can upload a new file to Amazon and you can get that up and running pretty quickly. So it's not a big deal to update your book if you need to on Amazon. However, you do have to go through some of the hoops of getting it ready for printing, and it does take some time. So it's not as though it's zero time. So um, if it were me, and it is me because I've got this workbook, I'd be doing what I'm doing. Put it out there as an electronic document that's easy to update and send out to people once you have updates. And then if people start asking and saying, hey, have you thought about doing a printed version of this? It'd really be handy if I could just go on Amazon and buy a printed version of it. Then you've got the evidence that people actually want that. But maybe you just put it out there electronically, and if nobody complains, then no complaints, no problem, and don't fuss about it. That's one of the options. All right. As a reminder, we're ending at 10 minutes to the hour each time. So we've got just 5 minutes left for questions. So if you've got any questions, then get them in there into the Q&A and we'll get those answered quick. Barry says about that picture in the slide deck for Zoom, it's app. It's on Macs right now. I think it will be on Windows soon. All right, I'm gonna like copy and paste that and get that up on my screen right now so that app. I must be, maybe I used too many M's or something in there. Oh, I think I did. I think it's 2 M's on either side of the H. Yep, I think I found it. All right, I'm going to take a look at that later. Gene, discuss a Google Docs workbook versus PDF version. All right, so here's the difference between putting out your workbook as a Google Doc versus PDF. PDF is 100%, you can control it. Whatever you see is what they see. And so there's a little bit more predictability there. It's probably going to print a little bit better if you're doing some design stuff in there. The benefit to Google Docs is that it's really easy to just update and then release it to people and say, here's the link, go grab your copy, which is what I've been doing. So now you can just export a Google Doc as a PDF, of course, but if you're doing a PDF, usually it's because you're putting in more design elements and you're making it look nicer than just a plain Google Doc. So if you're not doing that, then you might be able to just export from Google Docs and put up a PDF. One other thing about Google Docs is that when they get really big, they start going really slow and being unwieldy. I mean, slow as in you start typing into it and the characters aren't appearing instantly, things like that. And it can get kind of annoying. And so some of you may have noticed this in copies of the workbook that you've gotten from me. I definitely notice it when I'm working on the master workbook. That's all in one big, huge document. So there is that side of things that it's just the cloud-based document can be slow and a little bit clunky, whereas a PDF is going to load faster. So, but other than that, they're kind of the same. PDFs, you can also make it so people can type into the fields and do things, but you're not going to get like the expansion. So in a Google Doc, if people want to type a bunch of stuff into one of the spaces that you leave for them, then the doc just expands, right? Stuff just gets moved down. With a PDF, you've got your field, it's fixed. You might be able to do kind of a frame thing where it scrolls within that, but you can't just make the PDF flex depending on what people want to put into it. Gene, do you know if people located in China need a VPN to access Google Docs? Yes, absolutely. Anything Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you have to have a VPN in China in order to access the Google Doc version of it, which only makes it that much slower too. So there is that to consider. Elenia, I'm thinking to send my manuscript to my friends to proofread. Should I do this before or after the editing? After. Proofreading should come last, because when you get an editor involved, they're going to have other suggestions about moving things around and restructuring. And that might be too early of a point to get feedback from your friends, because if they start giving you feedback on that stuff, they're not the experts, and you're going to get all sorts of things, and it might be demotivating because you get so many suggestions and they're confusing and conflicting. Whereas if you send it to your friends and you say, I've already gone through this with an editor, I'm getting this ready for final publication, I just need people to find little typos or tiny things that don't make sense. If you introduce it to your friends with that kind of thing, then they're not going to give you these huge, sweeping, big changes to make. They're going to do what you want and just proofread it and tell you where the little typos and the little mistakes are. So, all right, 10 minutes to the hour. Thank you, everybody, for being here today for the Q&A session. Look forward to any more questions that you have in the Facebook group. And I'll be updating that resource list. I'm working on the checklist, and we'll have that to you this week. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.